Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about two very important issues: stress, burnout, and self-care, and cultural competence. So let's start off by talking about stress, burnout, and self-care. So stress and burnout, two words we tend to hear often, used sometimes interchangeably, but they really do mean very different things. Stress usually is too much. By and large, it's just too much of everything. Too many pressures that demand too much of you physically and psychologically. Stressed people can still imagine that if they can just get everything under control, they'll feel better. Burnout, on the other hand, is about not enough. Being burned out means feeling empty, devoid of any motivation, and really beyond caring. People experiencing burnout often don't see any hope of positive change in their situations. If excessive stress is like drowning in responsibilities, burnout is about being all dried up. One other difference between stress and burnout is that while you're usually aware of being under a lot of stress, you don't always notice burnout when it happens. So when you look at this burnout, a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion, it also is characterized by reduced productivity. It saps your energy, feeling increasingly helpless with nothing left to give. Most of us often will have days where we feel bored or overloaded or unappreciated. And when all the balls we're trying to keep in the air maybe aren't noticed, let alone rewarded. And maybe when we drag ourselves out of bed for another day of continued tasks that we never feel like we'll get done. So you have to realize the difference, though. Stress, again, you tend to be much, much aware, and you tend to be able to see a way out. Burnout, though, you don't. So here's a list. You may be burned out if. There's a list there. You can look at those. Those are all good questions to ask. Remembering burnout and stress can lead to being vulnerable to many illnesses. Because of its consequences, it's important to deal with these issues right away. So make sure you're aware of these questions here on this list. So let's talk about sources of stress, individual sources of stress. Common individual stressors that affects helpers: often we might strive for perfection, excessive need for approval, might have a lot of self-doubt, especially in the beginning of our careers, physical and emotional exhaustion from trying to do everything, for oftentimes it feels like for everyone. We often assume too much responsibility for clients, and we often ruminate about cases. We just can't stop thinking about them, thinking about them, thinking about them, trying to figure out maybe another way. So causes of burnout. We have three different categories here: work-related, lifestyle, and personality. Work-related causes of burnout: you might feel like you have little or no control over your work, lack of recognition, unclear or overly demanding job expectations. You might be doing with something that's monotonous or unchallenging and working in a chaotic or high pressure environment. This is often the case in human services and counseling. Lifestyle causes of burnout include worrying too much without enough time for relaxing and socializing, being expected to be too many things to too many people, taking on too many responsibilities without enough help from others, not getting enough sleep or exercise and activity, and a lack of close supportive relationships. And then there's personality traits that can contribute to burnout. Perfectionist tendencies. Nothing is ever good enough. You just want to do it a little bit better. Pessimistic view of yourself and the world. Pessimists, the glass is half empty. And optimists, the glass is half full. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, but you tend to lean one way or another. Also, a personality trait of being in control, reluctance to delegate work to others, and having a high achieving type A personality with a need to control. So burnout considerations, appropriate supervision is crucial. Assuring clear boundaries and emotional support, and personality traits of high tolerance for stress and multiple coping resources, that toolbox of different stress relievers that we can look for are also helpful in avoiding burnout. So we often talk about a 3R approach to dealing with burnout. We first have to recognize, watch for the warning signals of burnout and recognize them when we see them. Reverse, undo the damage by managing stress and seeking support. And then building resilience to stress by taking care of your physical and emotional health. So there are some common cognitive distortions that are associated with burnout. Cognitive distortions refer to systematic errors in reasoning that may lead to a faulty assumption or a misconception. So there are arbitrary inferences, which refer to making conclusions without supporting or relevant evidence. We just connect A to B without any clear reason to do so. Selective abstraction consists of forming conclusion based on an isolated detail of an event. So we laser focus on one thing only instead of looking at the big picture. Overgeneralization is in some ways the opposite. It's a process of holding extreme beliefs based on the basis of a single incident and applying them inappropriately to dissimilar events or settings. So let's say we walk outside, a client reports they walked outside, they're very scared of snakes. They walk outside their front door and they see a snake one day. They refuse then to ever walk out their front door again. This would be an overgeneralization. There's magnification and minimization, consisting of perceiving a case or a situation in a greater or lesser light than it deserves. Do we give something too much emphasis or something not enough? Personalization is a tendency for individuals to relate external events to themselves, even when there's no basis for making this connection. This is often something that happens when counselors and human service workers first go into the field. Everything kind of becomes about them, something is similar, and they make it really about themselves instead of about the client. Dichotomous thinking involves thinking and interpreting in all or nothing. It's this way or that way instead of the gray. So, how stress paves the way to burnout? Stress at work tends to impact your personal life. Working intensely with people opens you up to your own wounds and it reactivates earlier conflicts and pain. Constant stress that's not managed results in physical and psychological exhaustion. So, what about those impaired professionals? Helpers are challenged with recognizing signs of burnout before they become impaired practitioners. Impaired professionals are unable to effectively cope with stressful events and to adequately carry out their professional duties. Impaired practitioners clearly contribute to the suffering of their clients rather than alleviating it. So this leads us to something called compassion fatigue, which happens to a lot of people in the helping area. This is something that develops over time, and it happens when someone is overcome providing care to others, oftentimes with very poor boundaries in place. Professionals who absorb a person's pain and carry it with them are on their way to developing compassion fatigue. The ability to feel and care for others becomes eroded through the overuse of skills expressing compassion, and emotionally drained from hearing about and being exposed to the pain and trauma of the people they are helping. So compassion fatigue is a real issue that we need to be on the lookout for, because once we get that, we go to the opposite end of caring. Instead of, we start out caring too much, and then we end up not caring enough. Self-care. Self-care, this is very important for everyone, but certainly for anyone in the helping profession. It's a human requisite, a clinical necessity, and an ethical imperative. Some things to remember. There are no easy answers. What works for you may not work for someone else, and that pretty much goes for just about everything. Find ways to retain your vitality personally and professionally. This is going to be something that's going to take some energy, which oftentimes, remember, with burnout, we do not have. Develop a personal strategy for coping with stress and dealing with burnout. You have control over yourself. So look here, I won't read all of these things, but the bottom line is you have control over yourself. You make choices with what you're doing. Every day, every hour, every moment are new choices. You can choose to continue to do things that are not working, that are leading to burnout or leading to compassion fatigue. And if we continue making those choices again and again, we know where it will lead. Get help when you need it. Ask for help, supervisor, as well as outside of your work if needed. Again, striving of respecting your own limits and making self-care a priority, making sure you have that time in the day that you are setting aside for yourself. Nothing should come in the way of that. And here are some other things to remember. So next is cultural competence. Culture is the sum total of ways of living, which is built by a group of people. It's passed on from one generation to the next. Through culture, people and groups define themselves, conform to a society's shared values, and contribute to society. Culture includes many societal aspects: language, customs, values, norms, mores, rules, tools, technologies, products, organizations, and institutions. So there are 4 basic components of culture. Beliefs are things which are held to be true by a group. Religion is an excellent example of a belief. Values, that which is used to determine the difference between right and wrong. Norms, these are guidelines for behavior in a given situation. Norms comes from the word normal, and they typically tell us what to do. And then language. Language is the basis for communication and sometimes miscommunication. So let's now talk about cultural competence. And why is that important? The term culture can be thought of as a pattern of human behavior that includes thought, communication, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institutions of a racial, ethnic, or a social group. Cultural competence, at its most basic definition, can be thought of as an understanding and appreciation for cultural diversity. The idea behind culturally competent practice is that people are served best when there is an understanding and appreciation of the impact of a person's culture and cultural status on their life, and that by ignoring these elements, we, as the providers of service, will not only be ineffective, but potentially destructive as well. So, cultural competence, what can you do? What can you do about cultural competence? This is a really interesting process by which we can become more culturally competent. Culture and ethnicity are important, but not always obvious. So we want to explore issues such as cultural and ethnicity, even when the worker and client, quote, look the same. People who are different from you are not necessarily the same as each other. So we need to avoid assuming that all people, quote, from the same country, family, or local culture follow the same rules of behavior or preferences and have the same preferences, or so on. So even though somebody has something in common with someone else does not mean they are the same as that person. Ethnicity and culture are socially constructed, as well as is asking, what is, ask, how do you? And you can put there, how do you experience sadness, joy? How do you say hello? How do you say goodbye? So how do you? That's an interesting question to ask. The next level is suspending your beliefs. Step outside of your own cultural rules that often are taken for granted. The things that you assume to be true, that everyone holds to be true, are often not. And the hardest part in this whole process is this last one here. Suspend your disbeliefs. This is where we step into other people's ideas, customs, and patterns, and we really try to immerse ourselves in their culture and view the world from their culture. So please make sure you read all of the assigned readings in this module. And visit the page for the module page for further directions. As always, let me know if you have questions.